we've heard a lot today already about community input, and yet my understanding of the 94C program is to do exactly the opposite. It's to make it so that we can cite renewable energy faster, specifically solar developments, faster without that much public input, because that's how it goes through the process faster.
I respectfully disagree with that characterization. And if the number of approved decisions by this office to date, if we take that as any indicator, we can conclude that that in majority of the cases, host towns actually have worked collaboratively with applicants and office staff and have addressed issues without the need to go through the formal public comment hearing process. We have considered over 1,500 public comments. We have reviewed and addressed those comments no matter where they were posted.
For the sake of time, I have more questions. Sure. I appreciate that. I'll tell you, I represent 56 towns, municipalities, and a lot of our communities are being cited for solar, and I will tell you, every single one of those communities feels differently. They feel like their voices are not heard. They feel like there is not a process for them, and that when they do communicate, similar to my colleague Senator Steck's comments, when they do communicate, it doesn't actually matter in the next steps of citing. It's just a nice for them, something for them to send to, but doesn't actually factor into the final decision. You know, I know that there's a general feeling from our projection from our agencies that we are not actively citing on farmland. I had a bill with Assemblymember Barrett to remove farmland citing from the incentive program, the Build Ready program. And when asked why we would keep farmland in an incentive program if we are actively not incentivizing, I had no good answer from anyone from the second floor or from our agencies. So I'm curious to your thoughts on that, because I will also say, as one of my 56 towns, there are 2 solar projects cited in one town. There are many others, but specifically these 2 take up over 10% of the land of that one community. And so is there also someone in your organization that is looking at regional impacts while these things are being cited? Because we haven't seen that.
I mean, you mentioned a lot, so I have to unpack them one by one. So first point, as I indicated last year to your question, the 2 projects that you're referencing were not permitted pursuant to Executive Law 94C and Part 900. So I cannot comment on that one way or the other. Second point is the office makes every effort to provide local government and communities to basically have a meaningful and fair opportunities so they can be heard. And the office wants to make sure in any possible ways we can have those comments and concerns incorporated into the final decision making. Having said that, it's just the office also faces some challenges. I'll just give you a few examples. One, we don't have any express statutory authority if an full application has not been submitted in front of the office. 2 is, the office cannot address a community concern if the community or like local government refuses to participate in the process. And 3 is the fact that if the office essentially, in some cases, has to disagree with a position of a host town or a community group, in no way, shape, or form that means that essentially the office is ignoring the comment. Office, similar to applicants, similar to towns, has to meet certain statutory and regulatory legal standards. So that's really, I think, as I said, like to address like the second point about the public participation. And 3 is just with respect to the as you mentioned, like on the cumulative impact. Yes, the office is monitoring, tracking cumulative impacts of major renewable energy development on farmland. And that's something, again, we do it in the context of each specific case one by one.
But do you have a running you can share that publicly with us on how you're tracking that?
Absolutely. I mean, to the extent that we have the information available, absolutely. Why not?
I would hope you have the information, because that would mean you'd be tracking it holistically. Sure. Yeah. If not, then I think that answers the question. In a hearing that we had just a couple weeks ago on the scoping plan, the CLCPA, we know that solar companies are specifically citing on farmland. I asked ACE specifically what they were doing, and while they say they're not citing on farmland, they will then say there is nowhere else to cite but farmland because we're constrained with wetlands and other areas, and so there is no other land. That in turn says proactively they are citing on farmland, and so I just want to make you aware of that because it's something that we need to address. And in closing, the comments about agrivoltaics, we know that the technology for real large-scale developments for agrivoltaics doesn't exist yet. That's why this body has legislation for pilot programs and others. There's some work in Europe, but it's not happening here. The dual use that's happening is much lower to the ground and not actual really kind of large-scale farming, big equipment farming. And so that just doesn't exist. And so wouldn't it make sense to, as we're looking for dual use, because I agree with you, I think that is the future, wouldn't it make sense to hold off on citing on farmland until we have the technology to be able to actually effectively do dual use the way that we all want it to work?
This is a very important question, and we have 7 seconds to answer that. So the approach that we are taking is like multi-phase in our final permits today. So
we'll follow up separately because the multi-phase, once you put once you put solar panels on it, we know it's going to take many years to actually take that off, and the farmland has to be worked to get back into actual farmland.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Hinchey.